Okay folks, my name's Alistair McConnachie. It's Saturday, it's Scotland, and it is our street stall. And some of you may have remembered when we were growing up, we used to watch Blue Peter, and it was always inside the studio. But then sometimes they'd go outside for a special assignment. Well, this is like that, okay? Think of it in those terms. This is a force for good, outdoor broadcast, our special assignment. And we're here in Edinburgh, in the great British city of Edinburgh. And we're standing today outside the Melville Monument, which is here in St Andrew's Square. And the Melville Monument is named after Viscount Melville, who was a chap called Henry Dundas. And at the moment there's been a little bit of controversy about the man. And that's what we're going to talk about today in this Saturday street stall. And we'll be giving you some history about what's been going on, and we'll be talking about why some people, for example, like him, and while other people may find him to be a controversial character. And we'll also be putting that into context of the wider situation going on here in the United Kingdom at the moment. So there was going to be a protest here today. It's been postponed until next Saturday. Now, what do they find so controversial about this great man who is at the top of that statue? Well, to be quite frank with you, he's a great Scot and he is a Great Briton. And we're going to talk just briefly about him. He was born in Dalkeith in 1742 and he died in 1811. And he became the MP for Midlothian in 1774. And he had a long career in the British Parliament up until 1805, when he was at various times Lord Advocate, Home Secretary, Secretary for War, and First Lord of the Admiralty, which means that he was in charge of the Royal Navy. And Jeremy Paxman has written in his book Empire that no one did more to promote the interests of Scots in the British Empire. And Paxman writes, he goes, in Gilray's famous cartoon, he stands kilted with one foot in London and the other in India, as fleets of merchant ships pass between his legs. So he was a big mover and shaker in the British Empire. And that's one of the reasons that some people don't like him, because some people don't like that element of our British history. We love that element of our British history, obviously. But perhaps the most controversial thing is a manufactured controversy. And it is about his relationship with slavery. Now, some people say that he delayed the onset of the abolition of slavery. That's nonsense. If anything, he speeded it up, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the first thing that he should be remembered for, as far as the slavery issue is concerned, is that it was Dundas who, when he was Lord Advocate in Scotland, which is to say the chief legal officer for the Crown in Scotland, he fought and won the case which established that slavery was illegal in Scotland. He won the case which established that slavery was illegal in Scotland. So how dare anybody say that somehow he had it in for the poor slaves? He stood up for a runaway slave called Joseph Knight, who had been brought over from the Caribbean by his so-called master, John Wedderburn, and Joseph Knight didn't believe he was getting enough pocket money, essentially. So he gave notice to Wedderburn that he would leave, and Wedderburn didn't want him to leave the home in Perthshire, but he left, and he was arrested, and it went to court, and initially Joseph Knight lost. Joseph Knight appealed and won, and then Wedderburn appealed to the top court in Scotland, and it was Henry Dundas, Lord Advocate, who stood up for Joseph Knight and made the case, which he won, which established that slavery was illegal in Scotland. So why on earth are people against Henry Dundas and slavery? Well, this relates to something in 1792, when Britain was beginning to awake to realise that slavery was wrong and it was unsustainable in any case, economically. However, that was the time when William Wilberforce was promoting, quite rightly, the abolition of slavery. And Dundas also believed in the abolition of slavery, and I have a quote here from him where he points this out. He said that, this is Henry Dundas talking in Parliament in 1792, that the slave trade ought to be abolished, I have already declared. But I believe that any other than a gradual abolition will be attended with bad consequences to the public. The cooperation of the legislators of the West Indian Islands will be absolutely necessary to give effect to that mode of abolition which I conceive to be most eligible. So what he then did was he proposed a deal basically to these plantation owners that they would be compensated, so that they could gradually ensure that there wouldn't be people attacking, that the slave owners would be behind the abolition because they would be getting compensated for it. So he wasn't trying to stop it, he was just trying to find a way that would be diplomatically possible, because this is 1792. Slavery was not going to be abolished overnight, even with the best intentions of William Wilberforce. It was going to take time, and it was going to take economic changes to ensure it happened. Now, that his law passed, but it got turned down by the House of Lords. Okay, so it wasn't Henry Dundas who even stopped this, it was the House of Lords stopped Henry Dundas's idea of compensation. And it wasn't until 15 years later, in 1807, that the Slave Trade Act passed. Now, the Slave Trade Act prevented the trade of slaves in the British Empire, and that was enforced by the Royal Navy. However, it didn't stop the practice of it. And it wasn't until 1833 that the practice of slavery was abolished by the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833. So back in 1792, when Henry Dundas was advocating for the abolition of slavery, it wasn't going to happen overnight. In fact, the practice of it didn't stop until 22 years after Henry Dundas was dead. But it could most certainly be said that he speeded that up with his ideas of the necessity of compensation for the plantation owners. You could spin that the other way, and you could say that somehow he delayed it, but that would be not looking at history correctly, because there was no way it was going to stop in 1792. The world was not ready for it. The British Empire was not ready for it. The economy of the world was not ready to abolish it overnight in 1792. It was going to take time, and it was Henry Dundas's ideas which helped speed that process, which eventually led to the abolition of the trade in 1807 and the abolition of the practice in 1833. And all of that was enforced by the Royal Navy on the seas. And at least 1,500 Royal Navy sailors died or were killed enforcing that. Some people say it was much more. I don't have a figure. If anybody does have a figure, please do tell us where we can find out how many British people died enforcing these slave bans. Because we've paid in blood for this. Britain's paid in blood, and certainly the Americans have paid in blood as well. They had an entire civil war where up to 750,000 people died and killed each other over this issue. So how dare anybody say, for example, that Scotland or Britain, or even the United States for that matter, has got something to apologise for these days after we've paid in blood for whatever happened in the past. And you know, that's the point about Henry Dundas. However, I don't want to get too wrapped up in the idea that this is all about slavery, because as we're seeing here, unfortunately, there's something much deeper going on. When you see the Winston Churchill statue being attacked in Parliament Square, when you see the Abraham Lincoln statue being attacked, okay? Abraham Lincoln abolished slavery, right? But his statue got defaced in Parliament Square. A couple of days ago, there was a statue in Philadelphia that got displaced, and basically this was a man who had abolished slavery. He's a slavery abolitionist. His name was Matthias. I've got it here. Just hang on a second. I want to get this person's name correct. Yeah, Matthias Baldwin, who was an industrialist in Philadelphia, and he set up a school for African American children, and he funded it his entire life. And he also advocated for the abolition of slavery, and he got his statue defaced. I mean, so clearly what's going on there, people are defacing things that they don't understand the value of what that person has done. So there's no explanation for this behaviour.
It's good versus evil, and good is one. We have won, and you've got people right now up at the top of the Royal Mile, beautifully protecting the statues there.
Good.
And police all around them, trying to make out that they're a danger, and they're lovely guys.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for your support. Thanks. Well, that was just a passing lady there giving us some support. So yeah, we've got the Abraham Lincoln Memorial being attacked, and then we've also got, like yesterday, the Robert the Bruce statue in Scotland got attacked, saying he was like a racist king. How absolutely ridiculous. An anti-George Soros person over there. So it definitely gets people's dander up this. Anyway, we're trying to keep it straight. Good. Yeah, so, I mean, how ridiculous. I tell you why somebody would vandalise the Robert the Bruce thing. They'd see, oh, he's in the past. They would be unable to locate him specifically in the context of his time. They would just say, oh, he's in the past, he must be a bad guy. You know, so that's the danger that we are facing these days. Sorry, there's just stuff going on off the side here. It's okay, we won't actually show it to you, but I have to just be conscious of it. It's just, yeah, so everybody's going to be attacked. Do you know, if you wanted to take down every statue of every single man or woman who said something politically incorrect in the past, you would have to take down every single statue in Britain prior to at least the year 2000. You'd have to take them all down, because everybody has got stuff that they've said in the past which you could make an argument for was not politically correct. So what we believe as a force for good is all our statues of everybody should be respected, even if you don't like their politics, and certainly regardless of their ethnicity. All statues should remain, because all statues are rooted in some kind of social experience which has given rise to people respecting that particular man or woman and wanting to put up a statue for them. So we are for all statues to go up, and we're for not rewriting history, we're for expanding history. You know, I just talked to you there about Joseph Knight and how Henry Dundas...
Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler, 650 pages, I know what you're thinking.
Henry Dundas.
I studied Carlyle and the great David Hume. And the genius right there of James Clerk Maxwell, who gave us the electricity of this planet that we are all using.
Quite right. Good man. Good points that he's making there about the value of statues to educate us about what they actually did.
Fucking slave fucking statue.
A gentleman and a scholar.
I don't quite know where that guy's coming from. Actually, he's wearing a hubcap on his head. So,
Give me Maxwell's 4 equations of electrodynamics that he gave Michael Faraday.
He's kind of ranting here. What we'll probably do is we'll just move on a little bit round the corner just to sort of get away from.
Yeah, let's move from this gentleman and scholar.
Yes. This gentleman's just talking generally to the world, but he's got a very loud voice, so he's kind of getting in the way of our particular broadcast. So, yeah, all statues should stand, and we should debate around them, which is what we're doing right now, for example. And it's good to have a debate because we're bringing out the point that as Lord Advocate, he actually established that slavery was illegal in Scotland. So that's something that most of the people don't know, but we're telling them that. And like another thing that they'll say, which I've noticed quite a bit as well, is they'll say things like, oh, you know, Glasgow or Edinburgh was founded on slavery. No, it wasn't. Glasgow and Edinburgh were built by the blood, sweat and tears of the men and women of these great cities who sacrificed their lives to build what we have around us. That, for example, some of the wealth may have come from some things that people don't like. Well, what's the difference today? You know, the slavery in the world today, and those things that we use today are built by certain labour methods that we wouldn't necessarily agree with. So no, it's the Scots of these cities who built these great cities and who get the credit for it, and that's why you have the statues and street names to these people who funded the place and who made the place. Very sad to see people such as our politicians trying to promote this idea that somehow Britain is systemically racist. For example, we literally have an Indian descended Home Secretary, an Indian descended Chancellor. Here in Scotland, the Justice Minister, the man who's in charge of law and order, is of Asian descent. So it's absolutely absurd, and we totally reject the idea that Britain is in any sense systemically racist. Britain is one of the best places, the greatest places in the world for anybody to live, including immigrants, and that's well known because everybody wants to come to this country. So we have a great country here, a country we can be proud of, and a country where everybody who wants to make it has opportunity, regardless of your race, creed or colour, and that's the way that it should be. But what we should not be doing is trying to pretend that there's something intrinsically wrong with this country. There's not. This country is an intrinsically good country, and we would like to see our politicians making that case instead of kowtowing, instead of bowing down, instead of going along with this utterly false narrative of racism. Utterly false narrative of racism, because it's simply not true. It's not even provable by the facts, and so we just have to reject that, because once you start debating on those terms by imagining that Britain is a racist country, then you've lost, because you've already accepted that you're morally wrong. You've already accepted that you're in the wrong. So you just have to say, no, it's not. Look around you. It's clearly not such a country. So how dare you be suggesting that? And it's not until we're going to have politicians saying that this is going to stop. It's not going to stop until politicians start saying that. So we'll see. We'll see how things are going. But just take a shot of that. Good. So that's the Dundas Monument, the man who, as Lord Advocate, won the case which established that slavery was illegal in Scotland. Not many people know that. he's also the man that speeded up the abolition of slavery and found practical ways to do it in the economic times that he was living in. That was in 1792 when he promoted the idea that the plantation owners had to be compensated. But as I said, it wasn't until 1807 that the Slave Trade Act was passed, and then 1833 when the practice of slavery was abolished with the Slave Abolition Act 1833. So it was a long, weary process before it eventually got done, but it wasn't going to be happening in 1792 because society wasn't ready for it. William Wilberforce had really just started campaigning against it. However, Dundas realised immediately the need for it and advocated for the abolition of slavery. If we just move down here.
So are you in favour of the monument being protected?
Yeah, so, I mean, our politicians, they need to stand up. Our politicians need to stand up because they need to stand up for our moral integrity, the moral righteousness, the essential righteousness of our country, Scotland and Britain. Politicians in Hollywood and politicians in Westminster, they have to stand up. They cannot bow down to, quite literally, the mob and their false narratives of the false narratives which are trying to guilt trip us all. Because when you try to guilt trip somebody, you try to control them around moral principles. And so we cannot continue to be told that we and our forefathers are somehow wrong and that this country is morally corrupt, essentially. That's just wrong. We're not having it. We're not standing for that. We need politicians to get rid of these race baiters and to stand up to the race obsessionalists who are just making matters worse. Goodness me, everybody thought race relations in this country was actually quite good until this BLM movement started attacking British history. I mean, why on earth would they do that? You have to think it's not about slavery. It's maybe just that they themselves are just angry people. Maybe just like hateful. Maybe they just hate themselves. Because certainly there's no reason, there's no rationality there. And that's our message to them, Look around, don't act like spoiled children. The United Kingdom is a beautiful place to live. It's one of the best, if not the best places on earth to live, especially if you are non-white. It offers opportunity regardless of race, colour or creed. And at the end of the day, none of us ever own slaves, and none of them ever pick on. So, end of, basically, as far as that is concerned. We need to work together. And folks, this is a force for good. If you like what we're saying, go to aforceforgood.uk/blog, and the first article up there is actually an article about Henry Dundas, and it's one we wrote 2 years ago, but we've just revised it, added a little bit of extra information there. That's at aforceforgood.uk/blog, and stay in touch with us as well. Go to aforceforgood.uk/support, put in your name, put in your email, and you'll be kept in touch with everything that we do. But we at A Force for Good, we stand up for our cultural heritage, which gives us the precious inheritance which we enjoy today. And everybody of every nation has to do that for their own countries. They have to stand up and stand proud for who they are and to respect their ancestors, the good, the bad and the ugly, warts and all. Because even if we found out that statues were of men that we would particularly disagree with, we would say keep them up there anyway, because they help. They're a way into history. Who's that person on that statue? What's his name? I'll go and Google him. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I didn't know that. You know, it's a way into history. You don't wipe that out. And that's why we believe that all statues should remain standing. Even people that, you know, I personally would disagree with should remain standing, because it's a way of understanding. It's a way of entering the past, actually, and consequently understanding it. If you want to. A lot of people aren't interested, of course. They just walk through life without saying, what is this around us? But, you know, if you're interested, if you're that kind of person, then I think it's a good idea. It's a good idea. And not to change names or street names or anything like that. If you're building new streets, you might want to add your names there, but don't tear down old names and put up new names. So it's very quiet here today. It'll be a different matter possibly next week if this movement has its rally here. We'll see about that. But we'll certainly be giving them the message about Dundas, about the history, about the importance of just valuing our country and ensuring that we don't act like a spoiled child, and also standing by our ancestors. That's our phrase, stand by our ancestors, regardless of the good, the bad and the ugly. Yeah, and just one thing that I'm going to end this broadcast on is that I would say to the politicians, both at Westminster and at Hollywood, it's like, stop trying to guilt trip us with this rhetoric of racism. Stop falling into that rhetoric, and push back against it. Push back against it. And here's what you should do. If you're really caring about slavery, stop the shocking practice of people trafficking today. Okay, we should be putting more resources into fighting modern slavery, which requires, for example, us to invest in the border force, which involves us stopping illegal immigration, because it's through illegal immigration that we get a lot of people trafficking today. We should be hearing about action on that instead of all this nonsense about the past, always trying to put British people down, trying to claim that we're racist or it's a racist society. It's not a racist society, and we're not racist people. We're British people, and we've got a fantastic history, and we can go on together, but we don't need all this breaking up that is being put upon us by troublemakers essentially. So folks, that's the end of our broadcast for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've gained something from it. We'll put up more information about what I've just said on the internet later tonight. And for the moment, it's just me saying, Alistair McConnachie, check out aforceforgood.uk/blog. God bless the United Kingdom, and God save the Queen. Thank you.